Hello everyone and welcome to a special joint episode of the World Cement Podcast and Cementing Europe's Future, the podcast of Cement Europe, formerly known as CEMBUREAU. I'm David Bizley, Senior Editor of World Cement, and today I am once again joined by Koen Coppelholle, CEO of Cement Europe, at a pivotal moment for the European cement sector. With the launch of a new name and identity, Cement Europe, and the publication of the Cement Action Plan, the industry is presenting a renewed vision for how it can deliver on climate ambition, resilience, and industrial competitiveness. Envirotech, World Cement's industry-leading decarbonisation-focused conference, is heading to London on the 15th to the 18th of March 2026. Join your peers from across the cement industry for a 3-day presentation agenda, featuring a host of leading cement producers and experts in decarbonisation. Learn from leaders in the field, build new partnerships, and share your own insights and expertise at our multiple networking events and exhibition filled with leading technology providers. So, join us at Envirotech, the heart of the cement industry's decarbonisation discussion. Simply head over to worldcement.com/Envirotech to register today and secure your place. Make sure to use code ETPOD, that's ETPOD, for an extra 10% off your tickets. I hope to see you there. So, lots to cover today then. Koen, thank you so much for joining me again. Welcome back.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you for inviting me.
So, to kick things off then, what drove the decision to move from CEMBUREAU to Cement Europe? And what does this shift represent?
Well, actually, it's aimed to have a more recognizable brand, to clearly say who we are, and also having a fresh look and feel for our association. It directly says what we stand for, Cement Europe. It's focused on Europe, European Union. But also the members that are not member of the European Union, but that are members of CEMBUREAU. It represents also an engagement, an invitation to dialogue, not only with policymakers, but with citizens and society at large.
Okay. And this new identity also suggests a stronger link between the material and the content itself. What kind of message is this meant to send to policymakers, industry partners, and society at large?
It aims to say that the cement and concrete are strategic materials to Europe's future, and then we don't only think about the well-known and traditional applications in terms of housing and bridges and infrastructure, but more generally also in the sectors of defense. That's where our product will be essential, our material will be essential, energy, low-carbon energy sources in particular, also artificial intelligence. These will all be areas where we think that our material is strategic. So the strategic nature of our material is important, but also the fact that we are a very local value chain, firmly rooted in Europe, committed to Europe, but also we have 200 plants spread across Europe. So the contribution to local communities is very important. And we find it important through that to emphasize our European presence and commitment.
Okay. And beyond the new brand, there's clearly a broader shift in how the sector is positioning itself. What values or principles are embedded in this new identity?
Well, it more or less ties in with what I just explained. We aim to focus on a more human-centric approach, in addition to positioning the cement and concrete industry as an essential industry. For Europe, it needs to bring welfare, and it brings welfare to local communities. It contributes to society's needs when it comes to infrastructure, housing, energy, defense, also artificial intelligence, as just explained. So more positioning ourselves as an active participant, which is ready to engage in the broader societal dialogue.
Okay. The rebranding also happens to coincide with the launch of the Cement Action Plan. What is the plan, and what role does it aim to play at this moment in European policymaking?
Well, the action plan is actually a response to the Clean Industrial Deal, which in itself is a European policy response to the Green Deal. As our roadmap for 2050 and the ambition we set forth in the roadmap is a response to the Green Deal. And actually, it's our plea for making sure that the competitiveness and the transition elements that are necessary from a policy perspective are driving the agenda and are driving the single growth agenda in addition to the climate agenda. And I think that's the core element of what we have set out in the plan.
Okay. So the plan focuses on the twin challenges of climate and competitiveness. Why was it important to address these two together rather than separately?
I think the first point to make is that it's important that the plan sets forth a sense of urgency. It really emphasizes that the sector feels that it is delivering with the roadmap that we have delivered a plan to 2050, and the projects and investments are underway and in the pipeline. But we do feel that delivery, which is there and laid out, is not matched by the right policy framework. It's not sufficient for policymakers to set targets. They cannot be reached in the absence of a facilitating regulatory framework, infrastructure, robust financing. And that's why we focused, first of all, on competitiveness and then transition. You cannot build a house without first having the foundation, and that foundation is competitive. So that addresses the structurally high electricity prices, access to thermal energy, regulatory complexity, inconsistency often, but also the broader competitiveness, which also leads to a situation where we're not gaining ground in relation to the third country, so we're losing ground in relation. Imports have basically increased 4 or 5 times between 2016 and now, and our exports have halved over that same period. So that is really eroding the competitiveness of the European cement industry.
Okay, so touching on that, actually, the plan outlines a range of barriers to investment, from permitting to energy prices to financing, as you mentioned. Going into a bit more detail, what are some of the most urgent issues that need to be resolved?
Well, actually, I would say the first one is, as I said, the structurally high energy prices, the electricity cost. Especially when we decarbonize, we will need more electricity, the demand for electricity will increase. So I think that's a headache for many of our industries, the day-to-day operations, but also the future. At the same time, it's also true that we are a hard-to-abate sector. 2/3 of our emissions are process-related, and that's where a lot of our policy issues come from. We need the funding for breakthrough technologies. The regulatory certainty is very important for our business, especially when it comes to residual emissions from these hard-to-abate emissions after 2040. So there's a lot of legal uncertainty, regulatory uncertainty that is linked to that notion of hard-to-abate sector that we want to see addressed. Apart from then, in the transition, issues related to the infrastructure, both energy and CO2, and financing, and then indeed the low carbon product market uptake for low carbon products, which needs to be incentivized. I think this would be, in a nutshell, the core elements of what we asked for.
Okay, in terms of financing then, the Cement Action Plan calls for tailored funding mechanisms and the use of ETS revenues. What would an effective funding framework look like for the cement sector?
Well, first of all, the funding volume. I think the innovation fund at European level is still largely insufficient when it comes to decarbonization of the sector. And the second point that we make very strongly is that ETS revenues, that we will pay into these revenues over the coming years, that 75% of what we pay needs to come back to us into a decarbonization fund for the sector. I think that's a very reasonable request. So the volume needs to increase to fund the decarbonization of our sector. Second point, de-risking instruments is very important. We're facing also new value chains when you're talking about the carbon capture value chain. It's important to de-risk that value chain for each operator on that value chain. And there we're looking at guarantees, we're looking at contracts for difference that are essential financing tools. And then the last element would consist in reducing the complexity and accessing funding, because now you have different regimes. And there has been a step taken in the right direction by the new state aid framework, where there is indeed a connection between the innovation fund and state aid rules. We want to see more of that. We want to see one-stop shops when it comes to accessing finances and funding for the decarbonization of our sector.
Okay. And the Cement Action Plan also talks about the need for lead markets and demand-side measures, which you also touched on a little bit. What kind of policy tools could help create real market pull for low-carbon cement and concrete?
Well, it's clear that a large part of the measures that need to be taken there is going to be coming from the public procurement markets, I think, which is driving also demand for low-carbon products. But it's not only public procurement. We would see a combination of factors. For instance, we do have a mandatory disclosure of the global warming potential already coming out of the construction products regulation in Europe, and in fact also leading into the energy of performance of buildings directive, where the member states will have to set some roadmaps in place by 2028, 2030. I think that's what we're looking at in terms of drivers for the decarbonization. And then we're looking at national level, the uptake of labeling schemes that allow the low carbon products to come to markets. We have developed ourselves a labeling scheme that is also inspired on international regimes, but it also takes into account national flexibilities. I think that is important as a sort of mix of measures that will and needs to incentivize the uptake of low carbon products.
Okay, and stepping back a little bit, one theme running through both the action plan and the new identity is that cement is more than just an industrial product. It's actually an essential part of infrastructure. How do you think that could be better reflected in EU policies?
Well, when you talk about an essential part of infrastructure, we're talking about indeed also the construction market. That's a very large market representing 10% of European GDP. So we tap into that market, but in order to make sure that our product is well recognized and also the decarbonization efforts are acknowledged, we really want to make sure that the policy adopts a material neutral approach to legislation. It's very important that all the materials that are building materials, they all have their place in the construction market, but we want a fair treatment. We want a material neutral treatment of legislation. And again, facilitating market uptake of the low carbon products, as we just discussed, is an important part of that equation because we decarbonize with the purpose of making sure that we can reach the customers with low carbon products. So I think that's an important part in recognizing that role that we can play through durability, through robustness of our products, but also through our low carbon efforts in the construction market at large.
Okay. Now, the cement sector is often described as hard to abate, but it's also highly committed to transitioning to net zero. What gives you confidence that this transition can actually be achieved?
Well, as I said in the beginning, the roadmap that we put together has been updated in May 2024. And that has been updated because there are a number of projects, 120 projects and even more that are in the pipeline. Again, the final investment decisions heavily depend on the putting in place of competitiveness and transition requirements. But what I've seen and what we've seen over the past years is this is a heavy industry, yes, but it's able to be quick on its feet. It's able to put together the projects fast, to move fast, and that has really demonstrated the innovation spirit, the entrepreneurial audacity, I would say, of our sector. And that's what I'm optimistic about. But at the same time, emphasizing indeed that basic competitiveness and transition are the essential elements that we need going forward.
Okay, then speaking of the future, looking ahead, what will success look like for both Cement Europe as an organization and for the Cement Action Plan?
If we can, through not only the name, and as I said at the beginning, it invites to a dialogue, but also through the action plan, have a structured dialogue, very nitty-gritty oriented with policymakers. And the three institutions need to be involved there, so Parliament, Council and European Commission, where we can really lay out the specific demands for our sector and say, okay, these are the issues that we need to move forward on our decarbonization agenda, and then have an actionable agenda on these items. I think that would be success of both the name change, positioning ourselves, but also of the Cement Action Plan and the policy demands we have in there.
Okay, good. Excellent. I think that's a good place to wrap up this episode. Thank you for joining me once again and exploring these important issues facing the European cement sector.
Thank you so much.
And as always, a big thank you to everyone in our audience for joining us. Now, whether you found this episode via the World Cement podcast or through Cementing Europe's Future, please do make sure to rate, review and subscribe. And check out the other podcast as well. That's all for this episode. Goodbye for now. Envirotech, World Cement's industry-leading decarbonisation-focused conference, is heading to London on the 15th to the 18th of March 2026. Join your peers from across the cement industry for a 3-day presentation agenda, featuring a host of leading cement producers and experts in decarbonisation. Learn from leaders in the field, build new partnerships, and share your own insights and expertise at our multiple networking events and exhibition filled with leading technology providers. So, join us at Envirotech, the heart of the cement industry's decarbonisation discussion. Simply head over to worldcement.com/Envirotech to register today and secure your place. Make sure to use code ETPOD, that's ETPOD, for an extra 10% off your tickets. I hope to see you there.